Hey folks, welcome back. We're going to continue on. We're going to move into the rationality of risk um, and why risk is all of a sudden an important way that we define ourselves in modern society. This society has been, in many respects, labeled a risk society. Um, it seems that this idea of risk is working its way culturally and politically through our language and discourse. It, it's almost impossible for us to not see our lives in relation to risk. Uh, this has been created, this reality has been created through media. Media has saturated us with news about genetically modified organisms, pesticides, hazardous waste, lead, dioxin. It seems like everywhere you look, we're looking at a risk, we're looking at a potential disaster. And the biggest one being the impending doom of climate change. But in order to understand risk, we really have to understand it in reference to risk itself, which exists in the ideal world, and risky, which exists in the material world. So risk itself is a sense of what we should worry about and how much we should worry about that. Like I said, this is the ideal side of our worries and fears in society. And then risky is something that's more organizational, technological, economic, and biophysical. And it talks about the potential of circumstances for disrupting the goals and intentions of these realms. This is the material side of the worries and desires. And in order to understand risk, we really need to be able to make sense of both of them, because both help constitute and reconstitute each other and raise important questions about knowledge, democracy, and dialogue. This leads us into rational risk assessment, which is um, uh, the way that the rational side of science has constructed uncertainty. This rational risk assessment is conducted through comparisons of best knowledge about the rates and probabilities of hazards and selection of the least dangerous alternative. Risks, of course, in this calculus equal calculable, rational facts we can measure, record, and evaluate. It's no coincidence that risk analysis comes out of the scientific method, the more deductive, quantitative side of science. And it argues that risks can and should be evaluated independent of political, social, or cultural contexts. Much of economic theory follows these same assumptions that risks or economies can and should be evaluated independent of political, social, or cultural context. But in many respects, it's the political, social, or cultural contexts that are going to define success versus failure. Rational risk assessment, as I alluded to, is a version of rational choice theory. Rational choice theory is one of the earliest theoretical frameworks for understanding risk. In rational choice, we have, of course, rational actors that are weighing the pros and cons of any given action in reference to costs and benefits. It provides, rational choice and risk assessment, of course, provides simple understandings that are easily translated into public policy. And this statement represents the positive and negative side of rational risk assessment's reality. And that is by making it simple, we can talk about it, but by making it simple, we really brush aside the the individual nuances that make each individual situation unique. There are, of course, some questions about rational risk assessment perspective. The biggest one, and the one that we should always fall back on, is people do not always act in their own interests or act rationally. We see this on a regular basis. A mother risks her own life to save the life of her child. Well, that's an irrational act in reference to rational action theory. The idea that people act emotively is lost in rational risk assessment. We know people act based on sentiments as much as interests, and risk assessment is based as much on the norms and values of a particular society at a given time as it is on a calculation. In the end, culture often trumps rationality. Once again, there's some problems with risk assessment. When we turn everything into an interest, it makes it a tautology. What we mean by that is as if there can be no irrationality, then therefore there's no need to ever make a rational argument for doing something different. And around we go. And there's also the problem of incommensurability. So we can't place different values into one universal unit of measurement. The uniqueness of a situation does matter. And when you bring one set of values to measure another set of values, you might find that they're incommensurable. We also need to talk about contingent valuation. This is risk-benefit analysis, or putting every aspect of the problem into the same unit of analysis so everything can be directly compared. This, of course, is often defined by money. That's the common unit analysis. Is this going to cost us more than we lose in the end? And if it is, then maybe we should make the other decision. It also tends to think about solutions in how much a certain population is going to be willing to pay for a certain solution. And it always presumes all things can be compared in a given monetary value. So in the end, we have to ask ourselves, is it about choice? Rational and choice are often contradictions of terms. If you're constantly calculating the highest utility, there is really no choosing being done. In the end, we just choose the choice of the highest probability with the highest utility is the choice that's made. But often we have no choice in the risks we bear in life. They're just imposed upon us. We're not choosing these risks. We're not choosing climate change. We're not choosing smog. We're not choosing automobile accidents. They're being forced upon us. And we really need to understand that choice is socially constrained, and it's not a choice in the purest sense of the word.